Greetings, friends. It's been almost 6 months since I was baptized Orthodox, and I have been continuing to attend church. I go through the sacraments usually once a week. There are some times when I don't do it, but generally I've been going to confession at least twice a month and taking communion the same number of times. I have not taken communion without going to confession yet because I am still a newbie. I was not born Orthodox. I'm an Anglo convert in the Rokor Church, which is Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, formed by people who fled the Soviet Union, the atheistic Soviet Union. That was the original people who bought the building and converted it into the beautiful church that it is today. And in this video, I wanted to talk about why I came back to Christianity and why Orthodoxy specifically. I couldn't separate those two questions because they're related. You may as well tell the story in one longer video, so stick around if you're interested in the topic. The short answer is that there were intellectual reasons for me to come back to Christianity, and specifically Orthodoxy. But there were also more important reasons, and these reasons were intuitive, reasons of the heart, and these led me back to Christianity. When I was 11 years old, I began attending the United Church of Canada. I was not born in a religious family. I had one sibling or one brother, and my parents weren't particularly religious. My mother came from she grew up in Canada, but her parents were Latvian immigrants, and Latvia is, I guess, a Lutheran country. But she didn't grow up with any religion in Canada. My dad, not really any real religion. So we were all inheritors of the cultural legacy of Christianity. The baby boom generation, the legacy of Christianity, it's not going to go away right away, even when the apparatus of Christianity is already gone, even when it's not being taught anymore. And then people, like naive people, think that this is just how we should live. It's just natural and right and good not to murder, for example, or for there not to be pedophilia. That's just natural and good. And then they don't understand that when you're swimming in a sea of Christianity, which influences life and influences society, you take these things for granted. So my mother knew someone in the community, and that's how we began attending the United Church. And it was overall a positive experience. There were a good community of people there. I was in the youth group. There were other young people like myself, but it was largely a church with seniors. It was like over 50% seniors, and it was getting increasingly white heads of hair in the congregation, which is nice. You want to have white heads of hair, but it was getting to and again, I can't criticize a church just for that. I mean, certainly the Orthodoxy could have that too, but to an extent. But that is a bad sign, because it was part of it was worldly in the sense that it went with the times, and there was a boom in the 60s, and then the generations kind of fell away as that. Like, I saw photos of the church in the 60s, I guess, when it was still a new church. And all the people out in the parking lot, it was the same parking lot, same bland red brick building in a nondescript, simple style. Nothing you would call like finessed architecture, but the people, the congregation, there were like 2,000, 3,000 people. Well, when I was at this church, there were probably in the hundreds, like maybe slightly more than 500 or 600, which is not bad. But not all of those people would come out all at once. But it was nothing like it used to be. And the youth group was like maybe a dozen of us. And there was Bible study. And when I was 14, I went through a process of having a mentor for a few weeks, and I don't remember much about it. My mentor was a nice man, and he was trying to teach me some basic things, but I don't really remember anything from that. We were looking at sort of what is the Bible, where did it come from, maybe, but I don't think I really knew anything about Christianity, to be honest. But, you know, that's not an argument against that. But that's just where I was coming from. And I was confirmed in the United Church and baptized and confirmed around the same time when I was 14 with some other people, young people. And I should say that this church was a very liberal church. I mean, at the time, you're growing up in a default liberal society. We all do. That's the paradigm we live in. These ideas come from the Enlightenment. Ideas that anything goes, and openness and tolerance. Generally speaking, I don't want to make this video all about that. I've discussed what is liberalism before, but it's related, because there's not a separation between the spiritual and the political sphere and the worldly. Like, these spheres inform each other. All of reality overlaps like this. So they influence our worldview. What we see in the world is going to have an influence on how we understand theology. How do we understand, what does it mean to be spiritual? What does it mean to follow the true Christian God? Who is the true Christian God? Where can we find that? Ultimately, these would be the questions that would be confronting me later on. But when I was in my teens, unfortunately, I just didn't get it. And I didn't get it either into my 20s. In my 20s, I fell away from the United Church of Canada. So I was in that church for maybe 9 years, roughly. I just stopped. I started going less and less frequently towards the end, once we were getting to be, once you getting around university age. And I don't know if my dad, maybe he continued to go for a time, but I don't know. Well, my mother passed away in 2007, so she was a member of the church. And this church, very liberal, as I was saying, and they did New Age things there. They did Reiki, hands-on Reiki healing, which I don't know what. I'm not going to talk about Reiki. I don't know much about that, but it's just I'm just pointing it out that this was going on in the church. I heard from my mother that the pastor, and there were several pastors, but two of them were women. One of them ran for the Liberal Party of Canada. And I heard that she bent spoons with her mind. She used her mind to bend spoons, which is an Eastern practice. So it tells you, and they sponsored a refugee family. It didn't work out. It was a fiasco. The family, the man, he was troublesome and couldn't hold a job, and then, trying to support this family. But this is what you do. You do the open, tolerant thing. It's kind of like the United Church. Maybe it was just a social, I don't know the history, but from what I understood, it was kind of like a socialist subversion of the church from within. This is what happens throughout history. It's like and then you say, oh, well, that's Christianity. And then that's kind of the idea. It turns you off Christianity. And there were nice people there. I don't mean to, despoil the whole institution, but clearly it's not something seriously wrong here. I mean, the idea of having female pastors is not historical Christianity at all. And then they brought in a gay man pastor too. And the United Church, just like the Anglican Church, the Anglican Church was supposed to be the conservative one, but then they ended up flying the pride flag just like even more than the United Church did, and it's like how they operated. So they all just became like the main churches in Canada, I believe, were the United Church, the Anglican Church, and then Roman Catholic Church. So on the spectrum, but all completely subverted, and then on the margins you've just got non-denominational chaos. So I go into my New Age phase in my 20s. Sort of my New Age phase was always there because I was reading Neil Donald Walsh, Conversations with God, the blasphemous book. Well, I don't know if it's blasphemy. Maybe it is, but he's not a Orthodox, or he's probably not a Christian in any real sense of the word. But he's putting forth all sorts of completely radically different understandings of what God is and how we are in the world and what happens to us when we die, and probably not a good influence on me. But I was reading that already from the age of 12 because my mother was into all this New Age stuff. May she rest in peace. She was actually a very, very wonderful lady, but she was into a lot of this. She grew up, in the 70s, and so, or late 60s and the 70s, and like Seth Speaks and Carlos Castaneda novels, and Neil Donald Walsh, and many others that I don't know. But it was a New Age influence. But then that's kind of the general influence of the times. You're encouraged to check out travel and go to the East. And I was interested in going to India. I did have a, legitimate interest in India. And I went there when I was 22. I didn't really do spiritual things there, but I was partly interested in the spirituality of India. And I meditated. I began meditating when I was 18, and I meditated consistently up until my early 30s. So and when I say meditated, like I chanted a mantra, it was always the same mantra. Gora Anga Nitai Gor. I forget what it means. I was taught this mantra in a workshop explaining meditation. It seemed to work for me. It worked. Did it work? Well, I mean, I don't know if that's a good thing, but in terms of that you want to focus on your breath, focus on one thing, you get a sense of peace, kind of calm, and transcending the ego, or some might speak of ego death. That sounds kind of extreme, but maybe that is kind of the idea. To an extent, yeah. I must have meditated for hundreds of hours over those years. I was a privileged trust fund kid, to be honest. I traveled a lot in my 20s. I had lots of time on my hands. So I meditated for probably hundreds of hours, maybe more than 1,000 hours, maybe more. And at the end, why I stopped, well, I was already coming back to Christianity and starting to realize that there can be demonic influences going on with these things. But really, I don't think I was ever under the influence of a demon when I was meditating. But I think that it just ultimately led nowhere. But I'll say maybe more about that later. And I never was like a member of any actual I used to have some art from India, Vishnu, the elephant-headed god, and I had a Buddha, which were legitimate souvenirs from when I was in India in 2008. But ultimately I got rid of them, not for superstitious reasons necessarily, this is a talisman that, but it's just that's not, I don't believe in that system. But I never, just like the typical New Ager, that they don't actually go and become, very few of them actually become a member of a cult to Vishnu or whatever sect of temple worship. That's very rare that they would actually get. So it's just very superficial, vague stuff. It's not serious thinking at all. So into my 30s, now I'm getting into my 30s to get to the reasons why I came back to Christianity. And reason number one, probably not the most important reason, but a significant one that really did make me think, was that the theory of evolution no longer made sense to me. It always seemed empty and cold, and I had never been an atheist or a materialist myself. Even in my New Age phase, even throughout my whole life, I always believed in a soul and some sort of existence after death for the soul. That's always been an intuitive thing that I've believed in. But now I could no longer see species the way Darwinism said it was, and I no longer saw what obviously the human is something incredibly special. It's not an animal. Human, he or she is not an animal. That just began to seem obvious to me. So I'm not going to go into detail here because I've just talked about this, and there's much better discussions of this by other people on YouTube. It's not a hard subject to find. It's fairly low-hanging fruit, but it does provide a spark for anyone who really wants to know, where did we come from? Or at least could ponder that question. It will lead you, or at least it led me, to consider that maybe there really is a God. Reason number 2, I came to have a better understanding of history. And at this point, I'm pretty much reading from my, fair unedited article here, which I wrote earlier today. So I'm pretty much reading from that. But sometimes people like to see a real person sitting here, but I'm just reading at this point. So I came to have a better understanding of history. I came to understand what Western civilization is. This would have been by my late 20s, early 30s. Everything changed with 2016. I don't know. I was kind of late to developing. I had to go through my entire 20s before I stopped being liberal, because the liberal is the default setting. It's even if you think I'm a classical liberal, or I'm a libertarian, you're all just liberals, and I was one too. But finally, starting to understand what is Western civilization. Okay, there is this civilization. I am living in part of it, or what's left of it, and it is collapsing also. It is collapsing, this civilization. And when you look at the past, with just a basic understanding of history, you see right away how fundamental Christianity has been to our civilization. Not just Western civilization, but there was the Byzantium before that. There was the medieval world as well. Reason number 3, I saw the real presence of Christianity in Africa. Because after I lived in India, I went to Ghana and Tanzania for multiple months between 2010 to 2011, and then later I spent more time in Ghana. And particularly in Ghana, where I have more experience, but some of this applies to Tanzania too. I would say that it was a strange experience. In certain regards, I felt like I was in what I imagined 1950s America to be in Ghana at that time, in Volta region. It was like 1950s America, the same zeitgeist or the same feel, except it was a different continent and a different time. But it had that same dream image of what I imagined it to be in the 50s. Everything was looking forward, and a light filled all the people. People conformed in a good way. They had a strong connection to the community. They were very friendly and polite and hospitable. There wasn't any rebellion or revolution or ugliness, not amongst the majority of the people anyways. There were obviously things I didn't like. I'm not trying to paint them as, completely amazing people, but there was something special there, something that I hadn't seen where I came from. Now, there were obvious problems as well amongst the mostly charismatic Christians, Pentecostals, Mormons. I can't speak for the Roman Catholics in French-speaking Africa or whatever other group. There are problems, of course, and some corrupt pastors who dupe their sheep who let themselves be duped. But later, I still couldn't avoid thinking how European and American missionaries helped plant the seeds of the gospel in Africa. But now Africa believes, while Europe and America have fallen into disbelief. I mean belief and disbelief in terms of being Christian in a vague sense. And what is a Christian in a vague sense? What is Christian in a vague sense? If the Antichrist religion is going to come and use charismaticism and use other belief in UFOs and New Age beliefs, but then take on an apparatus of Christian. So that's just a whole other thing. This is why it becomes difficult using the term Christian, but in some sense it does apply when you look at other parts of the world. Again, at this time when I was in Africa, when I was 24, 25, 23, around 24, 25, I thought these Christians are silly, they're superstitious. Sometimes they're annoying when they stay up making noise and singing in their revivals all night long. When a good lady told me Jesus is going to come back, I asked her in deadpan whether Jesus would come down in a helicopter. She said no, on a cloud. Now the point here is not to laugh or to make the suggestion that simple evangelical or charismatics are always right when they tell you something about Scripture or revelation. The point is that their belief and their love for God had an effect on me as a, quote, spiritual but not religious young person. Though it took me longer to start to realize that I wasn't standing on as firm ground as I had thought when my 24-year-old self had dismissed their beliefs. And while this African flowering of the Protestant missionaries' efforts might have had its falsehoods, the spirit of these people in Africa did eventually convince me that some of the things they believed were true. It's not like I hadn't seen the alternative. I'd been through Muslim towns in Africa, and in particular the Muslim part of town where I stayed for most of my time in Ghana. I got more of a perspective on Muslims when I was in Tanzania, which is about 50% Muslim. These neighborhoods are not as safe as the Christian ones. I know what it is like to live in an area where you hear the call to prayer. Even from a distance, it's loud and clear and discordant and menacing, vocalized in the minor key, always something off about it. We are here, and you will submit to Allah. That is the message of the call to prayer. I've thought about it, and I can't quite put my finger on what other issues specifically it really was about Muslim areas. But intuitively, I felt that there's just a different mentality here. I don't sense the same light, even though maybe you can say, oh, that's just vague New Age talk. Yeah, but I mean it in a certain sense. Maybe it's subjective, maybe not a compelling argument, but that was my experience, and it led me further along the road to Christianity. In some sense, also, though I didn't trust the Muslims, I saw that they had a religion which wielded a real power and held its people together, and this is a stark reality for a young person in the West to confront. I don't know if that would make most Westerners want to become Muslim, but they might start to reconsider the concept of religion itself as not utter nonsense. Reason number 4, I came to see that there is such a thing as good and evil. And not in a materialistic or utilitarian sense. Well, not in that sense, because those materialist or utilitarian philosophies don't really allow for good and evil. There's just efficiency. There's just physical matter. But no, I came to believe and see that there is a spiritual or metaphysical reality to good and evil. There is such a thing as absolute truth. We cannot be relativists if we're being honest. And I came to see later on that absolute truth has to be incarnate in the person of Christ, because this is what gives rise to morality. Our obligations and duties are not to an abstract principle, they are due to a person. Reason number 5, I eventually came to be humbled. I had been quite naive in my 20s. I saw that I had been duped by the ideas of New Age philosophy. Things like the law of attraction were at best half-truths. At average, they were vague and useless, and at worst, they were demonic deception. And I now believed in demons, so that was an easier step for me to make. I mean, if you believe in aliens, then you can believe in demons. It's not that hard of a step to make, and I don't really believe in aliens anymore because I believe they're demons. I mentioned how I spent all that time meditating, and it didn't really go anywhere. What really had an effect on bringing me back to Christianity, I included this in reason number 5, which is just generally, being humbled. But what a large part of my being humbled was a health problem, which began exactly as I entered my 30s, exactly at the even right before I turned 30. It wasn't really, in the end, anything so serious. It was something which basically I overcame. But I had to deal with something for the first time in my life that I could not control. I could not quickly get over it. I had to go through some suffering. And it led me to see that sometimes we have to suffer to learn lessons, and that sometimes suffering can be a good thing. Maybe all suffering can be a good thing, or was intended to be a good thing, maybe depending on how we respond to it. In addition to this, I came to see that my worldly attachments and sinful habits were there. And then I fully understood the message of Christianity, that people are sinful, they need to repent. It had seemed to be like a control mechanism, but now I saw that it was true, because out of my own pride and blindness I had believed that personal freedom to do as I want and avoid pain was the right way to go. But now I saw that it was madness. We are here, in fact, to serve a higher purpose beyond our individualism. We are here to serve God and community, and if possible, to serve a family. And not everyone serves in the same way, but duty and service are the ideal. So that's why I came back to Christianity. Now, why did I choose Orthodoxy? I mean, I knew I had to be a Christian. It was a duty. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do this because it's fun, or I love this. It's kind of like, well, I'm, kind of messed up in some regards in my life. Not messed up, but wow, if I'd known all this when I was 18, wow, I would have done things differently. But whatever, it's okay. That sometimes that's how life goes. But it's a duty, is what I'm saying. It's not like, oh wow, so you're so happy that you join. It's not like joining a golf club. It's like, no, that's not why I'm now going to church and being part of that community and trying to, do prayer, read my morning prayers, and if possible my evening prayers, and through every aspect of your life try to rebuild yourself in the image of Christ. And we're not perfect, and we're going to stumble, and we're going to fall constantly fall. But why are you going to move in that direction? Because it's a duty. The alternative is even worse. Knowing what I knew, it's not that it's great. I don't think it's particularly fun going to confession. It feels like a very serious thing, that you're standing at like 7:30 in the morning or 9:30 in the morning, usually 9:30. If you're standing in line to do that, this is not a good feeling in my stomach. Why? This is not why I'm not doing this, because I want to do what feels good for my immediate gratification. That's not what this is about. So you have to choose. If you have got this duty on your shoulders, if it's weighing, if okay, well, it's about time to find a church, you're going to really have to think about what is the answer here. What is the right church to go to? Obviously, I wasn't going to go back to the United Church because it was terminally liberal. And by now I knew that any true church had to be something else, something not liberal, something beyond the politics, beyond the ridiculous nature of our times. Now, if I looked at megachurch preachers and TV personalities, well, they were all on TV. I mean, I never went to a megachurch in person, but I surmised them all to be jokes and frauds. And like my friend and I, we attended a Joel Osteen show, because that's what it is. It is a show. In 2016, when he came to Toronto. In September 2016, he came to Toronto. Thousands of people filled the Air Canada Centre, many of whom were physically disabled, and it was very sad. And Joel Osteen and his pearly white smile, and his band and his daughter playing in the band, and the music and the emotion, and really nothing that you could even identify as Christian at all. That's at that point, that's more like New Age self-help, bland content than it is anything traditionally Christian. That's Joel, but no one seriously is going to go for that. But other more people who are trying to be more serious, they might go the route of like getting into this revivalism or charismaticism, like I was describing, mostly characterized what I saw amongst Christians in Africa. You've got false doctrine there. You've got chaos, kind of seance, spiritism going on, a very emotional approach to religion. It's prone to the same manipulations of the egos of a pastor. It just seemed fake, just as fake to me. All of these forms of Christianity, if you could call them Christianity in the loose, not in the capital C sense, but all of these forms are fake, but they're fake in their own unique ways. So around 2017, I read a portion of the writings of 16th century Protestant reformer Martin Luther. It was around that time, maybe 2018. And for a short time, less than a year, I thought that Luther had made good arguments about sola scriptura, or all you need is the Bible, good arguments about faith alone, all you need is faith. My trust in Luther, however, soon began deteriorating when approximately 4 years ago I watched a video in which Roman Catholic Nick Fuentes debated the Orthodox Jay Dyer, and they debated the question of whether the Roman Catholic or the Orthodox Church was the true church laid down by Christ and spread by the apostles. Well, I didn't have a dog in that fight, but I was curious. And Roman Catholicism had always seemed very weird and corrupt. I'd never gone to a Catholic service. I was at a Catholic college in university, but I just ended up there randomly. Like, I wasn't a Catholic, so I was kind of loosely around some Catholics, but didn't have too much experience with them. But from what I had seen and experienced, it always just seemed something kind of odd. And obviously, there's this history of corruption there. Not that every church can become corrupt, but there was something kind of particularly, excessive. And I didn't know much about, the theology and the history of the church. And at that time, watching this video between Nick Fuentes and Jay Dyer, I really didn't know much about Orthodoxy at all, other than, this is it was one of the third, I knew it was like a major denomination of Christians in the world, but that was about it. Now, this debate didn't address Luther's ideas directly, because it wasn't debating a Protestant there, but it introduced me to basic ideas about how we understand and legitimize church authority. So Jay Dyer won the debate. I don't think even Nick Fuentes doubted that. Jay showed that history was on the side of the Orthodox Church. And history is a very serious matter. If you dismiss history, you're dismissing one of the ways we approach the truth. The Orthodox had the church fathers and the councils to back them up. They had the history of being the institution that decided which books went into what we now call the Bible. I know that there were different canons later when the Roman Catholics produced their own, but this was after they were excommunicated, I believe. And then, of course, later on, Luther's Protestant canon was more different still, having removed a number of books that Luther didn't like. So after watching this debate, I began a long journey of watching debates, Orthodox debates, debating Protestants, debating pagans, but mostly debating Bible alone Protestants and some Catholics. But it was really the Bible alone stuff, because that was really what had, at a previous period, seemed obvious to me, but now I could see right through it. And I consumed many, many hours of Jay Dyer's lectures and his debates, but not just Jay Dyer. I got into the Orthodox world online, including other apologists like David Erhan, David Patrick Harry, Father Deacon Ananias, to name a few. A notable debate I listened to multiple times, although this was already after I was pretty much Orthodox. This debate was between Deacon Ananias and the Calvinist Matt Slick. I guess it's just over which is the true church, or they're basically debating sola scriptura in the debate. I forget the exact name of it, but if you search for Deacon Ananias, Matt Slick, you will find the debate. I think it's really going to go down as a famous debate. I would recommend it to anyone seriously interested in Orthodoxy to listen to this. It's remarkable for how Ananias keeps his cool in the face of petulant ad hominems and nastiness from Matt Slick, while he sticks to his guns And his approach, which evidently was a wise approach, that he would not allow his opponent to just go to Scripture and let's just go to Scripture, let's just see what it says, and the meaning will be clear, and it will be the same clear meaning to everyone, to anyone on the street. No, it won't. We will have many different interpretations. The question is, by what standard do we believe to have the correct interpretation? That's the question Deacon Ananias pressed. That's the question Orthodox should press anyone asking them seriously why they think they have the truth of the fullness of the church. For Orthodoxy, the answer is Holy Tradition, the body of the church herself, the legacy of the apostles, the men themselves. Just as Orthodoxy highlights the personal nature of Christ, no other religion can capture Christ's essence, his gaze, in iconography in the manner that the Orthodox do. All of this includes Scripture, so it's not just making it one thing or the other, or this thing versus that. It's all included as part of tradition. You are expected to confess your sins to your spiritual father regularly, and in this manner he is getting to know you as a person, for every priest is an icon of Christ. Just as the man of a household is the icon of Christ, there's a personal nature permeating every level of this hierarchy. So by mid-2019, I had been convinced in an intellectual sense, and in other deeper senses as well, but at least intellectually, I was convinced the Orthodox Church is indeed the true church. But I did believe in a deeper sense that there is something supernatural and enchanted to reality, that God's mysteries and energies permeate our experience here on earth. They work through history, they work through men. Orthodoxy is vindicated by having correct worship. Worship is important. Worship is not anything goes. We yearn for this. Many people yearn for this. Worship wants to come back. Ritual behavior wants to come back. It's always there, but it wants to come back and express itself consciously. This is why some people get mixed up in pagan traditions, because they're searching to do something that they know on an intuitive level, but it is fully ordered and has the fullness of the truth in Orthodoxy. Don't go to a Vishnu temple or the monkey temple or the Buddhist temple. Go to the fullness. The fullness is in the body of the Church of Jesus Christ. Worship is not anything goes. Ceremony and ritual and worship, they connect us to God and to God's energies throughout all creation. But people nowadays, they fail to see that there is always a ritual dimension to life. We go through routines, we go through rituals in life, but some people scoff when they see honest and genuine ceremony. Well, these people tend to be atheists and materialists. But something's not right with them. I can't begin to explain why we might light a candle for the departed and say a prayer for them. It's more or less intuitive on our part. I also saw that there are, and this is getting into another reason here, but generally with this paradigm of liberalism, and I see how it's connected to theology. And I did see that there are, of course, Orthodox countries which have fallen into serious error, fallen into the traps of liberalism, countries like Greece, the Ukraine, of course, with its schismatic church. I think they have like 3 or 4 Orthodox churches in Ukraine. That's a travesty. That's a total travesty. There's one which is under the Moscow Patriarchate. That's the true Orthodox Church in Ukraine, but the others are not the true church. But this, of course, so every church, including the Orthodox Church, is going to have its divisions and its problems. But by and large, Orthodox nations have resisted this tide of liberalism. This is something you can actually see visibly in the world, just as you can see a visible Orthodox church in the world, a real institution with real churches and real congregations, real things happening, not a Bible study in your basement. You can actually see this in the world. It's not an invisible church. It's a visible phenomenon that you can join. It is a geopolitical reality, not to make the world important like it's the primary thing, no, but it's connected to the world. We don't put like the spiritual permeates the world. It's all connected. I'm not trying to say that politics is the sacred fount of God, and it's absolutely not. It's not what I'm saying. But you can see that the true church would survive geopolitically. It would not be wiped off the face of the earth. It would be there, that you could find it if you really wanted to find it. It will be there. Even countries like Russia, which have survived the horrors of the communist atheist regime, emerged later as a flourishing Orthodox fountainhead. So seeing this in the world, and having already come to see that my own Anglo heritage had turned its back on the true church, I already realized previous to this that like our whole Anglo culture is like self-destructing and opening the borders to every other country in the world, like complete suicide. So you already see that, and then you say, oh, well, is it a coincidence we've also been falling away from God? It's not a coincidence, it's connected. Just as we adopted feminism and destroyed the family and, caused us all to become these isolated individuals in ourselves, connected to the internet's a benefit, but just connected to the internet in ourselves, and it's all part of this paradigm shift into the conclusions of liberalism. Coming to see that my Anglo heritage, my Northern European heritage, had bought a lot of the lies. Latvia was Lutheran country. They bought into the lies. The English and their commercial nature and their individualist spirit, which gave rise to what we saw in America. All of the deception, all of the lies of liberalism, lies of the Enlightenment, the materialist paradigm. This meant that I was humble in another sense, because the first sense of humbling that I mentioned earlier, that the general, like bringing me back to a basic understanding of Christianity, that was a personal humbling, like, oh, I should have lived my life differently when I was younger, in some ways. Like, I'm still happy the way my life went, but knowing what I know now, I would have done it differently. And going through pain and physical suffering, like that kind of humbling. But then there was a totally different kind of, just total different category, but also humbling. And this is very important. And this is the kind of humbling where you see that your whole people are being chastised. They must be chastised. They must be chastised. I asked this question to Sam Shamoon on one of his live streams. And I guess he didn't like the question, because even though he said that any question you can ask him, because they're open for questions, then he didn't want to deal with that question. He said it's not relevant, even though he said, oh, you can ask any questions. We're looking for questions. But no, he didn't like that. But no, it's a good question. And I think, yeah, we've been chastised. There's no Orthodox Church in Canada. There is no Orthodox Church of Canada, the way that there's an Orthodox Church of Russia, or an Orthodox Church of Romania, or Orthodox Church of Serbia, or there's no Orthodox Church of Canada. There's no Orthodox Church. There's sort of like there is an Orthodox Church of America, but it's not really the same thing. So is this a chastisement? This is a different kind of humbling, a different level of humbling. And you look to leadership in the world. You do look to see who is leading here. Who is leading here? And it's not the Protestants, or it's not the Roman Catholics. And then when you come to the true church, you're no longer angry. You're no longer angry at mass immigration, lockdowns, vax mandates. When you see that your people are being chastised for their own good, sadly. And because you realize that we deserve it. So you can't be angry, because we deserve it. We have to follow the truth. And who is standing up for the truth? It's not any of the Protestant North American churches who are just rebels, or the non-denominational who are just rebels for the sake of rebellion. And it's not the corrupt Roman Catholic world with their false teaching of the filioque, papal infallibility, confusing, mixed messaging of whatever else they claim to believe. Like, consider, for example, how the Catholics have canonized saints they previously condemned as heretics. But the Protestant landscape is even worse. There are tens of thousands of various Protestant denominations. But if we're taught, at least as we see it, as we understand it, that the gates of hell shall not prevail against the true church, then this chaotic diversity of doctrine is not evidence to me that this is the true church. Orthodoxy, as I said, has not held perfect unity, but far, far more unity than anywhere else. And they do this by holding to the laying on of hands of the apostolic succession, which determines who will be a priest and who will be a bishop. And they do this also by holding to the canons of the councils, which were established very, very long ago. And this is what we do in the case of a patriarch trying to do something make something up on his own. And if they do that, they can be excommunicated as heretics. Heretics are really meant to categorize people who were in the body of the church and then were excommunicated. If you really didn't grow up as part of the church, then you're not really even a heretic. You're just someone outside the church who never had a chance to come in. In the Orthodox Church, you have the fullness of Christ. You have the sacraments of confession and communion. You have the original liturgy practiced by the early Christians, a liturgy that we believe is reflected in the book of Revelation. Going to confession, attending liturgy, receiving the body and blood of Christ are healthy things for the soul, but it is also a serious matter. One does not approach communion lazily. The church is ultimately a hospital for your soul. The liturgy of the church, the affairs of the church, the way the church sees things and teaches you to see things, these are not things that can always be purely understood rationally or explained by a simple reason. So there's much more to say about orthodoxy, but I shall stop here. Hasta luego, amigos!